Welcome to the Serenity Journey. My name is James, and are you struggling to stay present in the now? And is this destroying your inner peace? This is one of the biggest things that we talk about as we go back into understanding the Serenity Prayer, is that we have to learn how to live in the moment. In the Serenity Prayer, it says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living every day in the moment. What is it? Oh, living one day at a time, enjoying every moment at a time. We have to learn how to find joy in embracing living in the moment to find our way to peace within ourselves, to find our serenity inside of ourselves. We have to find a way to stop worrying so much about the future and dwelling so much on our past. One of my teachers told me years ago that one of the things I needed to work on was to stop dwelling on the past. And this took me years of understanding to really understand what he was talking about. Nowadays, I use the past as a way to look at data of what I've done wrong so that I know I can change what I'm doing in the present moment. But I don't spend my time dwelling on the past as much as I used to. I don't spend as much time dwelling on the mistakes that I've made and feeling guilty and shame. If you really think about it, if you're spending a lot of time in guilt, in shame, and blame, it's blaming things from your past, which are things you cannot control, for your present moment feelings. And it's just using the past as an excuse. I changed things up a little bit. I'm standing up today. I'm hoping maybe that'll help me with keeping a little bit different because I've shifted everything around. I shifted with my cameras. I still got my webcam down here. But I thought I'd change things up a little bit. But one of the things that we're working on as we're working through the Serenity Prayers, we're working on our own pathway to inner peace, is, are we embracing living in the moment, living for now, instead of worrying about the past, instead of feeling guilt and shame and blame and anger and resentment. All guilt, shame, blame, resentment, those are all judgments based on the past. And when we learn how to let go of our past, we let go of our personal history, we're able to start living and embracing living in the moment. And it's a shift. It's something that takes some time. It's something I'm still learning more and more how to do this. But are we sitting around, worrying about what might happen in the future, or dwelling on things that we've done wrong in our own past? And I've done this a lot myself. I've seen a lot of people struggling with this in their lives. It's one of the biggest areas of struggle a lot of people have. Our past is just that. It's past, and there's nothing we can do to change it. The only thing we can do in the present moment to change is we can change the meaning that we give to our past experiences. So as we start going into this journey of finding peace, we can pick a meaning for our past that brings us to a sense of peace, that brings us to a sense of serenity inward, inside of ourselves. Can I be at peace with myself, believing that this is what that meant to me? And if it doesn't bring you into peace, if it brings you discord, if it brings you disharmony, if it brings you anger or resentment or rage or jealousy, these are just ideas and just feelings that we get when we're putting a negative meaning on our past experiences. I personally believe that everything that's happened in our past happened for a reason. Often when you're stuck in that and you haven't healed those wounds that those past experiences caused, you can't see that reason. You can't understand it. And we don't have to understand it. Part of surrendering is learning to accept that we don't have to understand why things happened or how things happened. We just have to accept them as they are. One of the biggest things that I learned was this idea that I learned from Tony Robbins years ago, which is called realistic optimism. So we look at our life as it is right now, and we accept our life as it is right now. while having an optimistic outview for where it can go in the future. When we start looking ahead, we have to look at it with an optimistic approach. If we're looking at the world fearing for a pessimistic approach to the future, fearing what might happen. We might get sick in the future. We might have disease in the future. We might have this pandemic going on indefinitely. But if we start thinking about all those negative things, then we're only going to put our attention on the negative things that might happen. Instead, if we have a more optimistic approach to the future, we can see that this pandemic happened maybe for a reason. We can see that there's been a huge cultural shift that wouldn't have happened without this pandemic. And maybe it was happening slowly, but this pandemic helped speed it up. And some of it was stuff that needed to be speeded up. So when we start looking at the world from a realistic acceptance of where things are. Sorry, the toddler's crying in the other room. So Jessica's got him. But I'm hearing the scream. I don't know if y'all can hear him screaming on the microphone, but I can hear him screaming in the other room. So we'll have to go check that out in a few minutes. But when we start looking at this realistic optimism, we're going to start seeing a shift in the way we look at things. We're going to start seeing the world as it is and let go of these ideas of what we think life should be. This is one of the big things that we think we should remove, is just the idea of this isn't the way it should be. A lot of that should be is just our ego. That's our consciousness trying to determine and trying to judge life based on a preconceived idea. And most of those preconceived ideas come from our past experiences. So again, this is part of that letting go of the past, letting go of those preconceived ideas of how we think life should be and accepting it for what it is. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's not everything that we desire, but suffering comes from putting too much attention on that pain. Suffering comes when we put too much attention and time into the pain instead of healing the pain, focusing on what we wish was different instead of focusing on what is and allowing it to be. This is one of the things that I have found in my own life. Whenever I get into conflict within myself and turmoil and conflict with other people, it's because I'm putting too much attention on either what I wish was true or the way I wish things would be, or I'm putting too much attention on a negative projection of a future outcome, a negative projection of the future of what might happen. If Emily's having surgery next week. And if I was to sit here and think about all the things that could go wrong with her surgery, I would be terrified. But I'm not. I'm actually optimistic about it because I see the long-term goal. I see the long-term effects of what can happen and how this is going to benefit her over time. Yep. I may have to cut this short because everybody's screaming in the other room. And I don't know if it's picking up on the microphone or not. But we are having to create a more optimistic approach for our own future. Now, we also have to say that I want this to look at it as if we have to stop trying to control the future outcomes. We have to stop trying to control what may or may not happen in the future. When we learn to surrender to what may or may not happen and start looking at things from a different perspective, finding a sense of peace within ourselves and then looking to the future, that's going to help us to develop this optimistic approach to life. A lot of people think that I'm very optimistic. I try to be optimistic. Some people see my pessimistic side because, they see me whenever I'm off camera. And sometimes I can be fairly pessimistic about things. But at the same time, it's trying to find the balance and the harmony between the optimism and the pessimism, looking at it realistically as what's going on, but then trying to figure out the solutions that can help move things into a better place. We have to find ways to find time for our self-care, to work on ourselves, to spend time in our own reflection. And some people need more reflection time. I need a lot of it. For me, I need a lot of that self-care time. Some people don't need it as much as I do, and that's okay too. Everybody's different. Everybody's got their own kind of motivations and movements in their things. But one of the things that we're going through as we are looking into embracing our own past, we have to look at, okay, what are the traumas? What are the events that have happened in our past that I'm repressing, that I'm holding down to because I don't want to face them? We have to look at, when we're dealing with the past, one of the big issues that I've seen a lot of people do is, instead of healing their past wounds and really letting go of them, and I did this a lot myself, I was repressing them. And when we repress things, this dives them. They're still there, but they're running in our subconscious mind. And as we start diving into understanding our own subconscious mind, we're going to find this is what we talk about, the shadow work, the shadow self, is healing those wounds from our past instead of just repressing them, allowing them to look at them and shifting the meaning that we give to them so that they can be a more positive experience. And as we dive into the psychology of things, I've been studying a lot of Jungian psychology. Carl Gustav Jung, who was a Swiss psychologist in the early 1900s, and he actually is the one that developed a lot of the consciousness and the psychology around spirituality. A lot of the terminology that we use in the spiritual circles, like synchronicities and collective consciousness, and a lot of these ideas that we talk about in the spiritual circles, he was the one that psychologically developed a lot of that terminology and a lot of that psychological profile of what it means to be spiritually aware and having this higher levels of consciousness. There's two real psychologists that I study a lot of. One is the work of Carl Jung, and the other one is Abraham Maslow and the psychology of human needs. And when you kind of find a blending of their two schools of psychology, you can find a lot of what we teach in spiritual truth, in spiritual circles. And a lot of it reflects a lot of very ancient spiritual teachings that we follow, and how to practically apply them in your mind, in your body, in your spirit, and how to find that consensus between your mind and your emotions and your spirit and your body and your physical actions and behaviors. And as we do this, this allows us an opportunity to heal, to let go of those wounds, to let go of those things that are traumatizing us, that are keeping us, that are triggering us. It's often been said that your outer experience of the world is a reflection of what's going on inside of you. So if you're seeing resentment and hatred and disharmony in the world around you, it's because of disharmony inside of yourself. And a lot of that disharmony comes from, again, your past experiences. So how do we embrace that past experience? How do we shift the meaning? First, we have to dive into our own consciousness. We have to start identifying and diving into our subconscious mind and start bringing those ideas and beliefs and meanings into our conscious experience. As we do that, now we can shift them, we can rewrite them. This is where we use affirmations a lot. Affirmations help you to rewrite your subconscious mind, but only when they're used properly. A lot of people teach affirmations and they just write these positive statements and they read them, but they're just very kind of bland in how they go through them. When I use affirmations, I realized that there's two things, and I've talked about this in some of my other videos, but there's two things that cause something to ingrain in your subconscious mind. One is intense emotional attachment, which is why traumas affect us so much, because there's intense emotion attached to them. And then the second one is repetition. So when you can meet or exceed the emotional attachment with the affirmations and you do it repetitively, that will ingrain it faster into your subconscious mind. So when we do these positive affirmations of what we want, we have to not just think them, not just state them, but we have to feel them, and we have to repeat them consistently over time. I recommend if you're doing affirmations, I meditate on affirmations for at least 20 to 30 minutes per affirmation. And I only do one or two at a time. So I will do this, and I will do it every day, over and over and over again, and meditate on it every day, and ingrain that new belief system, that new idea. Repetition. What are you putting into your mind repetitively? Not just one time listening to a self-help program. I listen to these kind of things. Most of the content that I consume is motivational content, is self-help content, is spirituality content. And I listen to some of the same things over and over and over again. And the reason why is because it's ingraining those ideas into my subconscious mind, and it's helping to ingrain and shift my perspective in the subconscious programming to shift your subconscious mindset. This is why programs like NLP work, and some people get into them. I think things like NLP have a lot of tools that can be useful, but some people get so fanatical about their specific set of tools, like their set of tools is the only set of tools that works, and they're not perfect. By the way, NLP is not perfect, but it does have a lot of tools that help you to reprogram your subconscious mind. And so I've studied, as I've gone into things, I've studied anything I can find that affects the mind. So I've studied NLP, I've studied psychology, I've studied behavioral psychology, as well as subconscious psychology. I studied the physical brain and studied neurology, especially with my own neurological problems. I have ADHD, which is actually a neurological problem in your brain. To actually have ADHD, there's a lot of people that are claiming ADHD that may or may not have it because they self-diagnosed. They haven't actually been through the physical testing necessary to determine if you have it or not. I did whenever I was a child, and my brain does not produce the appropriate amount of dopamine. And so my neural pathways fire differently than most people's, which is why I'm so different and wacky and weird sometimes. But at the same time, we have to understand the physical neurology, the physical aspects of how the brain works. I've also studied psychology, studied transformational psychology. I've studied all different schools of psychology. I've also studied, spirituality and what spiritual teachers teach, and the psychological effects of spiritual belief and spiritual teachings. And that's one of the key areas of study I've studied a lot. That I've also been studying things like NLP. I've been studying NLP for years, and human behavior and how those things affect each other and how they all interrelate with each other. And because of this, I've kind of got this juxtaposition of ideas, and sometimes I try to figure out how these ideas all flow and fit together. And so much of it is in our mindset. One of the things that I learned a long time ago is about 80% of your success is mindset, and 20% is the physical behaviors, the mechanics of doing what you do. And so when we learn to embrace living in the moment, we can focus on our mindset and our mechanics. And when we're stuck in the past, when we're stuck in reliving the past, that brings us into a mindset shift that we have to make so that we can have a more secure future. So how do we start making these shifts in the mind? First of all, we want to bring those ideas into consciousness. What are the negative beliefs that I have in my subconscious mind? Your subconscious mind holds your beliefs, your expectations, your meaning that you're giving to your past experiences. Those are all stored in your subconscious mind. But also in the subconscious mind, when you start doing a lot of work in your subconscious mind, you also find hidden talents and skills and abilities that go along with that. Because when you repress things from your past, you also wind up repressing a lot of skills, a lot of abilities. I think everybody is born with a certain level of psychic ability. But culturally, as we're growing as children, we're taught to repress the imagination, which is most psychic abilities require an active and use of the imagination. People with ADHD have an overactive imagination, by the way. That's one of the keys to understanding ADHD is our imagination is going on overdrive, but we have to learn to connect with that and to work with that in order to be able to do things that serve us. A lot of people still have an active imagination, but they're using it in a negative way. Every time you're stuck in fear and worry about the future, you're activating your imagination because you're imagining a negative outcome for the future. So we have to break free of that negative outcome and break free of that part of the imagination in order to move forward, in order to shift that consciousness into a positive imagination. And we want to use our imagination in a positive way. This is that realistic optimism. That optimism is imagining a realistic but positive outcome for the future. Now, we have to be realistic and positive. I can't imagine myself going out and jumping off a building and flying like Superman and expect it to be real, because that's not realistic. It defies the laws of nature. It defies the laws of the physical universe that we live in. So I know that's not going to happen. So we have to be realistic in how we approach this. But I can imagine abundance. I can imagine healing for myself and for other people. I can imagine a world in which people live at peace and harmony with each other. And then I can take steps towards making that a reality. I can then devise plans and strategies that can help make that a part of our reality. But we can't do that without being able to imagine it. I see a lot of philosophies and worldviews out there that come from a beautiful utopian imagination, but then the strategy used to try to make it happen came from power, came from disempowerment, came from places of using force to try to make them a reality instead of allowing them to develop naturally. And this is where some of the ideas, I see a lot of this going on in our culture right now. I see a lot of people trying to have an idea in their imagination of a world without police, without the need for police, without the need for prisons. And I think that's a beautiful idea. And I think that it's something that we can achieve as a culture, but we're not there yet. And there are some people that are trying to use force to make it a reality when the culture isn't ready for that shift yet. Culturally, we haven't grown and expanded to a place where we can live in that reality. But I do believe that it's real. I think we need a more realistic approach to how we transform into that kind of culture. I think it's a beautiful idea, and I think it's a culture we can shift our world to. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I think it's going to take years. I mean, think about it. We've needed these things for thousands of years. I doubt it's going to shift in an instant. We can't force it to happen overnight. But I think we can start making shifts in our culture, taking shifts in our ideas, in how we relate with people, and in how we handle people that have those negative behaviors, so that we can shift the culture into a place where we no longer need those things. But we have to live fully in the present, realistically with where we're at right now, in order for that to be a reality. And instead of trying to force things to happen, we have to allow them to happen. We have to allow the culture to shift and be a force to helping that cultural shift. That's part of what we're trying to do here with the Serenity Journey. We're trying to help raise the consciousness of people, helping people to have these ideas and have these shifts in consciousness so that we can transform the world into that place that we want it to be. So I hope that this has been helpful. I've been kind of off and on rambling here just a little bit, but the biggest thing is learning to let go of your past, learning to heal your wounds from your past, identify them, identify the payoffs for them. One of the big things I learned from Excuses Be Gone by Dr. Wayne Dyer is that every negative thought that we have about our own past, the reason we hold on to those is because we're getting a positive payoff in the moment for holding on to that idea. The biggest way to break those habitual thinking patterns is to identify what's the payoff I'm getting from holding on to that habit, and what is a new way that's more empowering that can give me the same or greater payoff. When you start making that kind of a shift, you can start to change in how you approach yourself and the world around you. These are just a few ideas. Letting go of your past, learning to embrace living in the moment, living fully consciously now. This takes a shift. It takes some practice. When you first start doing it, you might be able to maintain it for a few moments and then your mind's off again. But the more you do it, the more you become mindful of where you're at right now in the moment, the more you're going to be able to influence the direction you're going in the future. You can never fully control it, but you can start to influence it with practice. And then start, when we think about the future, let's have a realistic but optimistic approach to how we're going to approach the future. If you want a better career for yourself, you have to have a realistic looking at where you're at right now and create a realistic strategy to help you get to that new career. I don't expect you, if you start finding your purpose and you know that you're out of alignment with your purpose, don't go out and just quit your job right away. Like, some people I know did. But instead, create a realistic plan that you can replace your income. You can start making that shift slowly, start doing the training, figure out what kind of training, experience, skills you need to develop. What kind of skills can you find inside your own shadow self that can help you bring yourself into that new career? But then as you develop those things, then you start trying to do it in a practical way, in a realistic way, but optimistic for the new future that you want to create for yourself. And then you can start making that shift in a realistic plan in a way that strategically benefits you instead of causes you more pain, more trauma, and can possibly lead you to ultimately failing because you didn't do it in a strategic, logical way. So this is where we want to be looking to an optimistic future and creating strategic plans on how to make that transition instead of just trying to force that new vision of the future to be real now. This is some ideas that can help you. We're writing more about these. I'm writing a book on the Serenity Prayer and how to apply these principles to your life. So if you want to know more about that, leave me a comment below. Hope you're having a fantastic day, and we'll see you next time. Also, make sure you join us all around the web. You can join our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, our Instagram, our Twitter, and we have our TikTok, even though we haven't been posting on there much because our phone's broke, and I'm hoping to get that fixed soon. But this is going to help us continue the content and continue sharing these ideas and helping more people to make the shift in consciousness that they need to live the future of their desires. We'll see you in the next video. Y'all have a fantastic week.